Welcome back to a complete history of Manchester United. I'm your host, Wayne Barton, author and producer of several Manchester United books and films. Joined as always on this journey by the legendary football writer, Paddy Barclay, author of several books, most significantly to this series, the definitive biography of Sir Matt Busby. There it is.
Get the plug over, done with as soon as possible. Right, Sir Matt Busby, definitive biography, the man who built a football club.
And if
Still
I may
available.
say so,
Still
yeah, it's still
available at all.
available.
Yep.
And as
Especially at bad bookshops.
and some good ones as well.
And some good ones as well.
And if I may say so, I know it's there in the title, the definitive biography. That's the title. It's also my opinion. It's a very accurate reflection. One of the, if you've got 3 United books on your bookshelf, that needs to be one of them. I don't know if that's. I don't know the other 2. I'll think of them over the course of the series.
You should know. You probably wrote them.
Okay, right. So this season is the 65-66 season. And before we get into that, let's get through the housekeeping. If you're watching the video, give it a like and subscribe. Join in the conversation in the comment section. If you're listening back on the audio podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a review on the platform you're listening on. Paddy, this is the build-up to a World Cup season, and it's the first ever World Cup that's going to be hosted in England, which has meant the redevelopment of Old Trafford has been continuing. Not quite as grand as those pre-Munich plans, but redevelopment nonetheless. And, you know, a grandstand it is for United that's been built.
Yes, it was. It came largely by now. Of course, Louis Edwards, father of Martin Edwards, was the chairman. Harold Hardman, long-serving director and chairman of United, had died a few months earlier. Louis Edwards was an increasingly powerful figure, friend of Matt Busby's, and the two of them were very impressed by a stand at Manchester Racecourse, and this had executive boxes. Now, they were almost unheard of in football, but of course were part of the racing, the greyhound or horse racing experience. And Matt and Louis just thought this is perfect for Old Trafford. We give the fans who can afford it a really comfortable experience, a meal and so on. Now, as you know, everywhere in football now, but it was very much a new idea at the time. It was also of a cantilever design, which meant no pole. Before, stands always had stanchions and poles, so there were the inevitable obstructed views. This was, because it was built during the 65-6, or it was completed in the early part of the 65-6 season. It was really it's difficult for younger people to realize how sort of revolutionary this was. It was a magnificent site, held 10,500 seated with the 34 executive boxes, and 10,000 in a standing paddock underneath. So this was, visible evidence of Manchester United getting ready for a brighter future. And at the start of this 65-6 season, when it would, they were able to raise a little bit of the money towards it. And it was a gamble because England were hosting the World Cup. And it was quite a clever move, because otherwise Main Road would probably have been chosen as one of the northwestern grounds. But of course, the cantilever stand made absolutely sure that it would be Old Trafford that would be Manchester's ground for the World Cup held in England.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the World Cup in due course. Before that, England went to Germany. Manchester United had a couple of pre-season friendlies in Germany, both lost before the Charity Shield, which was at Old Trafford. On the it was now, like we said in earlier episodes, it's now been held before the season. United took on Liverpool, the FA Cup winners. Entertaining game, 2-2, but Lowe got injured early on, and really that's set the tone for the domestic season for United. And really disjointed with injuries. I mean, first of all, Dennis Lowe, they take a couple of weeks to get going. Lowe does when he comes back. It takes a while to get him on the goals. They win on the opening day, but they get this spate of injuries around the squad, specifically in goalkeeping positions as well. Even Bill Foulkes, ultra reliable games. And then it all sort of comes to a head when they lose 5-1 at Spurs, which has its own little bit of history. John Fitzpatrick becomes the first ever league substitute for United. And I think it's already on hiding to nothing when he tried on to deliver his own personal sense of retribution.
Yes.
Physical, they couldn't deliver it in the result. And the start of the season, Paddy, I mean,
yeah,
it is a difficult one, isn't it? Because I mean, you've got Pat Dunn picks up an injury. Dave Gaskell comes in and he's not quite. He's never quite been ready, and it means a recall at some point later in the season for Harry Gregg, who's playing with one shoulder. This defensive injury as well. So you've got a few problems in there for Busby to deal with.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the Spurs game was probably the biggest testimony to this. 5-1. There was to be a sequel to that, but we won't get to that yet. The game was mainly memorable from the neutral point of view for a wonderful slalom goal by Jimmy Greaves.
Oh yeah,
absolutely sliced through the United defense for one of the great goals. But already the Spurs Man United games were developing a reputation for glamour, which I think really survives to this day. I don't know about you, but I think, Man United fans of a certain age put a little tick beside the Spurs fixtures, expecting something special. Immediately it comes to mind the fight back from 3-0 down to draw 3. Was it draw or win at the White Hart Lane?
5-3, in 2001.
I mean, it always seemed to be staggering matches, and this tradition was already underway then. But on this occasion, yes, United 5-1 down. At one stage in the earlier first half of the season, United were below halfway. I think they were 13th at one stage after the 5-1 defeat at Spurs. So, yes, it was a bit of a setback to the idea that United were going back up to the top as in the pre-Munich days, as on a regular basis. But I think Busby felt that the cups, United were of course in Europe as well as the FA Cup, that the cups might be a more realistic target on this occasion.
Yeah, you mentioned the Spurs game, and there was a sequel. United won 5-1 in the return. I always remember a famous quote from Dennis Lowe. He said, and this sort of gives a representation of how individual results were seen in the day, and how there was an acceptance of losing, even if you'd lost in, to a great team playing entertaining football, there was no disgrace in that. Whereas today, if United lost 5-1 at Spurs, there'd be recriminations for weeks about it. But then Dennis Lowe said, we always seem to score 5 at Spurs and score 5 at home to Spurs and ship 5 at Spurs. It's the only time it actually ever happened, but it is representative of that.
Well, you are talking about some of the greatest players in the world. I mean, at this time, I think that we're talking about Lowe is still the holder of the Ballon d'Or, So he's, a world figure, world-renowned player. Jimmy Greaves was was also having made his name in Chelsea and then in Italy. So, briefly in Italy, and so, this is these are top players by any standards. So it's no wonder that the games were a byword for entertainment.
Yeah, the defeat at Spurs had put United in 11th. You mentioned they dropped even further than that for a little while. They had this negative goal difference, but there was a preoccupation with the European Cup. That there was a run that took them to Helsinki and Frankfurt before Christmas. Overcame both of those challenges, where they were drawn against Benfica in the quarterfinal. And it all led us to this. I mean, they beat Benfica in the first leg. Harry Gregg now back in goal. It was the most reliable keeper that United have got on the books, even though he's half of his body's not working. And it leads us into this epic week at the end of February, where United beat Burnley. And like I said, they're looking to the Cubs really, because they're 8 points behind Liverpool. They have got 2 games in hand, but Liverpool are looking really strong after their FA Cup win, and they're doing really good in the European Cup Winners' Cup as well. So United, they have this game where they come back at Wolves, they're 2-0 down, and they come back to win. Another of those epic clashes at Molineux they'd been won in the previous season as well. And then they travel to Benfica for the second leg. Now, United are 3-2 up from the first leg. Benfica are only a couple of European Cups. Most of that great team still in issue. And really, it leads us into this night in Benfica in Lisbon, Paddy, which is, I mean, this is the night when Matt Busby's been building his European dream. Obviously, there's a bittersweet element to it. But
it became reality because he, if we go back to the Busby Babes a few years earlier, as the years went by, they got closer and closer to a team that could really compete with, in those days, Real Madrid with the yardstick. Then it became Benfica. And so the task was to get to that standard. Now, bear in mind, you very rightly set the scene by saying, the great Benfica team who'd won it, I think, already twice, who'd become the successors to Eusebio, had become the successor to Di Stefano, as, if you were sort of saying, who are the great players? Okay, yes, Law was the Ballon d'Or holder, but Eusebio had been doing it for years already. And in the first leg at Old Trafford, Eusebio against Styles was the play within the play, entertainment in itself. Charlton stood up and was counted as well. But yes, United, Torres pegged United back from 3-1 to 3-2. So the stage was set for a perfect balance at Benfica, away in Lisbon. Bear in mind, though, that Benfica had never lost a European match at home. And what's more, United had very uncomfortable memories of Lisbon, where they'd taken a right battering against, I think it was Sporting, hadn't they?
A couple of years earlier, yeah.
Yeah, a couple of years earlier. So the stage was set for Eusebio, but the star was George Best. He overshadowed Eusebio on his own pitch and looked like the most irresistible force in the world of football at that time. If I can just, and I'm afraid I'm reading from my notes here, but he scored with a header, did George Best, as if Benfica had no goalkeeper. He then ran through and dispatched a low drive, as if Benfica had no defence. And then he left Connelly with just a tap in. It would have been quite a night's work, but only 16 minutes had gone. I mean, that is the time it took George Best to reduce the unbeatable Benfica to a beaten side. There was an own goal, I think. Shea Brennan gave away an own goal. But Creran stepped up. Charlton had a brilliant goal to make it 5-1. And that's still to this day one of the greatest English club performances in Europe, and certainly must be one of United's. It was more than that, though. George Best, because of his short work he'd made of the Benfica defence and the Benfica's indeed entire reputation, a star was born, a world star. And it was obvious that since the Beatles were the kings of popular music through internationally, that George, with his long hair, should be basically, it was like Beatlemania coming into football. Well, that was the sombrero. I don't know why the sombrero became, because this Portuguese sombrero is not like that. That looks like a Mexican or a Spanish one. But anyway, who cares? George, with his fashionable leather coat and his dark glasses, returned a world star. El Beetle. Well, again, we're mixing up cultures a wee bit, but it does at least have an international edge. It does testify to his international reputation. Such excitement, extraordinary. And there weren't sort of rock star footballers. You could talk about Cristiano Ronaldo now, or the other Lionel Messi, but George had put himself in that stratosphere with, or at least had completed his rise to that stratosphere with that performance.
Yeah, it was like a meeting of all these perfect storms coming together.
Yeah,
Like you said,
yeah,
pop culture on the rise. The fact that games were being broadcast now. They had the World Cup in England. There was a greater concentration on the game. We're in a
yeah,
new age of post-war youthful liberation, of which I'm sure
yes.
you indulged yourself, Paddy.
Yeah, I did my best. Yeah,
And George, obviously, he was bigger out of this in terms of British sport because of what he did, and it's difficult to overstate how important that individual performance was because
yes,
this is, I mean, first of all, on an emotional level, in how it ties to United's history in this series and the way that we've talked about it, this is the kind of performance that had been tipped, and it would have been due. It would have been coming from an Edwards
yeah,
or a Taylor, but Best was
yeah,
younger than them. Do you know? And that's what made it even more stark. I mean, this is
yeah,
a seminal deconstruction of a great side and a performance so great that it's the first game that gets named after him. And this is a player who has 2 or 3 named
yes,
after him in his career. It's a second goal for me, Paddy. Oh, there's 2 things that really get me about George's performance. The first is that he scores a goal that's disallowed.
mm-hmm.
And it's just a run-of-the-mill goal. But because of the frenzy of everything that's happened, Jimmy Murphy, and this is one of the great studies of the students of the game and the great observers, for years afterwards, he thought the Best had scored a hat-trick in the game. So much so that when he wrote his first his only autobiography in 1968, he referred to Best's hat-trick. It happened in so much of a blur.
Yeah,
Clearly, there was more poetic license and less fact checking, but this is a podcast where we go through the fact checks and ruin all those poetic stories. But Jimmy, for a long time, had thought that George had scored a hat trick, which just showed you he just made mincemeat. He was such a blur of what he was doing. And let us not also forget the fact that Busby, probably cautious of what happened in Madrid with the Babes, had told his team, try and keep it tight for the first 20 minutes. And George just played his own game.
in one ear and out the other.
Yeah, and it's the second goal for me, Paddy. The way that if you look at the goal again, and the footage is there, everyone can go and find it for themselves. It's the way that he moves through 2 defenders, and there doesn't seem to be the space for him to do it. I mean, you couldn't imagine. I mean, Duncan Edwards he's simply too big to do something like that, whereas George could fly through like he's.
That's absolutely right. He also he could take the little. He had such balance.
Yeah.
I'm sure the laws of physics will correct me, but he had such balance that you could take his legs away, and he would still remain upright. It was, and there was an example of it. Really, he had no right to get through that space, but he did because he just had such poise, almost like a balletic poise. That you watch a ballet dance and you think, well, they're going by rules that no one else has. Well, George also had his own rules of remaining upright and still being able to perform.
Yeah, I obviously wrote a biography of George a couple of years ago, and one of the great things about writing that was I talked to Antonio Simoes, who was the Benfica winger on that night, the opposite number, the number 11, a creator in his own right, a Portuguese legend. And this is in keeping with the theme of the grace that people had for being on the pitch in seminal performances like that. I mean, this would be a game that you would expect nobody would want to recount on the opposition side. Nobody would want to. You mentioned it earlier. This is Benfica, the great Benfica side, their first ever defeat at home. They've been humiliated at home. You wouldn't expect someone to speak openly about this, much less speak with the grace that Simoes did. I mean, he talked to me about it being a privilege to be on the pitch, as that for that performance, and it just shows you. I mean, that's how good the performance was, because that, I mean, let's not get anything right. Yes, sportsmanship was better in the 60s than it is today. It was less antagonistic. There was a greater respect for your opponent, but the sting of a result like that would still hurt much the same for a seasoned winner like these guys. So for Samoa to come out and say, look, sometimes in football, you are part of something that somebody else has script, and it's so magnificent that it's just a privilege to be a part of it. So we're still having conversations about his 50, 60 years on. And you mentioned he's one of the greatest all-time team performances and results for United, but in terms of individual performances and the impression that it made, I don't really. There might be one better, but when you're thinking about it, when you're talking about it in these terms, it almost feels like you're describing the best individual performance in United history.
Yes, it's I can't think of a better one. No, I think that's fair. I mean, you can we're jumping ahead a little bit, but John Aston might have something to say about that. But no. I mean that you couldn't get in a way that you could make John Aston's European Cup final performance, and it was good. It was great. He was man of the match. Yes, that's no question, not in question. But not you couldn't even compare that with George's performance in Benfica. No,
it's a miracle. And the bittersweet aspect of it being that it should have been the kind of performance that Busby would have seen from one of those lads who perished in Munich, and it made George's contribution all the more poignant, because now all these hopes rested on him. And then when he was injured against Partizan, he was actually injured against Preston in the cup, and he tried to battle through it, but he picked up Partizan Belgrade that were dealing with their own.
That was in because getting through Benfica, United drew Partizan Belgrade, a sentimental return for Charlton, Fulks, and Busby, of course, to Belgrade.
And Belgrade won the first leg of that 2-0. United were in a lot of trouble because George picked up this injury. A bit. He was playing with heavy strapping anyway on his thigh, and he was eventually need surgery on it. But he tried to battle through. They took him out of the game basically, and the footage that we got for when we made the film of True Genius, there was the footage that showed him actually buckling over in the challenge he went through, trying to bravely go through on the goalkeeper, and he was already playing with the bandage on his leg, but he went over and you could see that he was playing through pain anyway. And he wasn't the George Best that destroyed Benfica. And without George for the remainder of the season, the United sort of stumbled, didn't they? Really, it was a disappointing climax to what promised so much on that night in Benfica.
Yes, absolutely. Because as we mentioned before, the focus was very much on the cups, and the FA Cup took United on a very short journey, but it was a short journey for both clubs, because it was to Bolton in the FA Cup semi that United and Everton converged. Close game, Wayne, but not the right result for United. Who was the key man there?
Colin Harvey, who would later become Everton manager and Everton youth team coach, and would actually coach a young Wayne Rooney. Ties go all.
So his contribution to Manchester United's cause wasn't entirely malign.
But for these United lads in the 60s, I mean, the likes of Dennis Lord, George Best, Lord already been there and won an FA Cup, so as that Bobby Charlton, but the likes of George Best, who'd been there and sort of been around the Wembley party when that had happened, they were desperate for a cup final of their own. And obviously George may not have even made it to the final anyway, but they were desperate for that, and that was another of those bad luck stories for United. Everton going to the final, and obviously Partizan Belgrade in the second leg. They'd already established too strong a lead in the first leg, so United, it was a very physical game, the second one. I think Styles' stories from the Eusebio confrontation had reached the Belgrade players,
That's
and
right.
it was a very difficult second leg in that, but United won 1-0, but was still out. Really, I mean, we talk about the campaign being disrupted by injuries, and really that's it. I mean, the key times to Dennis Law, George Best, Bill Foulkes, Harry Gregg. The Foulkes injury necessitated a recall for Noel Cantwell, who in the previous season had looked to be on the verge of leaving, Paddy. I mean, he was still the club captain, but Dennis Law stepped in as team captain.
Yeah, Dennis Law would have the arm. I don't know if they had armbands already at that time, but Dennis Law was the sort of team captain on the park when injury permitted, and Cantwell just was basically a replacement, a fringe player by this stage, although he was, as you say, club captain. But there was a bit of a sign of this good youth team that we alluded to in the last two episodes. A couple of them were beginning to make an impression, weren't they?
Yeah, we'll come on to the squad in a moment. Before we move on to that, let's talk about Bobby Charlton. Bobby Charlton becomes the first Manchester United player since Johnny Carey to win the Footballer of the Year award. We've talked about him being so often on the periphery of the spotlight, and obviously we've given a great deal of time to George's individual performance in Benfica, but Charlton's consistency now was so integral to the team, and the way his level of performance was so high that he was being talked about in the same breath as Lowe and Best, wasn't he?
Yes, he was indeed. I mean, in paying tribute to George's great performance in Lisbon, and in the previous episode, Dennis Law's riotous goal scoring that had given him the Ballon d'Or, that the Holy Trinity, as I don't know, was it David Meek or somebody who coined that phrase, that was already beginning to form. And Bobby Charlton's emergence, despite his, you could say, was less of a showman than the other two, Best and Law, but he was beginning to become as spectacular. He'd been moved, as we mentioned in previous episodes, from outside left, which he'd often played, to that central midfield comes striker role. And an example that the word pile driver was to become associated with, but when you thought of long range explosive shooting, you thought, in later years, you immediately thought of Bobby Charlton, maybe Peter Lorimer at Leeds, but a fulminating shot that Charlton had, and we saw it in this season towards the end of a season in a 6-1 win at home to Aston Villa. Very much an end of season atmosphere, only 23,000 in the ground at Old Trafford. But we saw one of the Charlton pile drivers, explosive drive from very long range. Bear in mind that balls were so heavy that you very rarely scored from outside the box until then. But Bobby Charlton was to make it part of the game. Yes, he got one in that 6-1 win at home to Villa. Jimmy Ryan, we talked about youth. Jimmy Ryan was also in that game. He'd made his debut in the previous one. I can't remember who that was against. But yeah, certainly a bit of end of season cheer for that sparse Old Trafford crowd. They could almost all have crammed into the new Cantilever stand.
Well, they may well have done as well. United finished in 4th in the league, 2 semi-finals, and that shared Charity Shield performance. We'll run through the squad as I put up the team sheet. Team photo there of about 50 players. I won't mention them all as we go through.
We could easily. There are a lot of people. Yes, I can. For those who can't see it, it must be very frustrating listening to you rabbiting on about it. But you can see on this extended squad picture of about 24, 25 players, you can already see is Jimmy Ryan in there, John Fitzpatrick. Yeah, the kids are all right. They're coming through, and that's a great picture.
Yeah, a great number of players, and many of them. If you go back and watch this on the video, if you listen on the audio, many of them we have already mentioned, but we'll go through the squad statistics now and come to the two new players who've played in the team this season. Although we have given them previous mentions, but we'll give them their own dedicated time this time round. The senior goalkeeper this time round, as we've already talked about, was Harry Gregg. But really, this was an indication of United's problems in this area. He played 38 games in all competitions, 26 in the league. Gaskell and Dunn played 8 times in the league each.
Which is extraordinary when you think that Dunn was the first choice throughout the title season of, was it 64?
Yeah, last season, yeah. He'd been brought in for that.
Amazing sort of rise and fall, that really, in a sense. Although he, as you say, he still made 8 appearances.
Yeah, 11 in all competitions, and Gaskell made 9 in all competitions. They both had a game in the European Cup.
Due to Harry's fitness.
Yeah. In the fullback positions, Shea Brennan, 39 appearances in all competitions, 28 in the league, so even he missed a few. So Cantwell coming in for 23 appearances, following just a handful of the previous season. He made 29 in all competitions with 2 league goals. Tony Dunn, though, any idea that he would miss games would have been laughed at by Dunn. He missed only 2 in the league. 40 appearances, 1 goal. He didn't score many, but that goal came in the league. He played 56 times in all competitions. Bobby Noble, we'll come on to now. So Bobby Noble was the FA Youth Cup winning captain. We have talked about him in previous episodes, but bared well enough for this time around. I mean, he made his debut at the back end of the season, 20, so quite late when he did come into the side, but that's because United were blessed so heavily with the fullbacks that they had. Stockport-born, very quick, very intense in training, 2-footed player, predominantly going to, he was tipped to come through a left back, but he could have played it right if he needed to. But he's also so intense in training that he was banned from coming up against George in case he might kick him out of the weekend. In fact, he actually admitted himself, I had a chip on my shoulder. I wasn't too happy with the Glamour boys. I was inclined to be a bit naughty. Paddy, I mean, he made 2 appearances in the league. This should have been the start of one of United's great careers, right?
Very much so. I mean, everybody who I saw him play twice, I think. And when I first went to Manchester, and he was everything people say. Neat, tidy, undemonstrative, but incredibly effective. One of these guys who could look after himself. In fact, he went beyond that at times, as you've just said. And as hard a player as you could possibly find, but he could play. But he could really play. And probably the greatest asset he had is that he was, if you look at, no discussion of Man United great fullbacks could be complete without Dennis Irwin. Well, Bobby Noble was probably even more adept with his wrong foot, so to speak, than Dennis Irwin. And I'm not saying necessarily even better than Dennis Irwin, but even though he played relatively few games, you would have to put Bobby Noble in that argument about great United fullbacks.
Yeah, and he'll get discussed next season as well because he does become a prominent figure in the team.
Yeah.
The centre backs we already mentioned, Bill Foulkes, just reduced to 33 league appearances this season, but a critical 33 because of the 9 that he missed. 48 in all competitions and a single goal that came in the European Cup. He was often joined in the back line, and we'll put up that tactics sheet in a moment, by Nobby Stiles. 55 appearances in all competitions with 3 goals, 2 in 39 in the league. Pat Crerand in the half-back line as well, 41 league appearances, 56 in all competitions, and a single goal. And John Fitzpatrick would be the other guy who would come in. He made 3 appearances, 1 substitute appearance in the league, so that's 4 and 1 in all competitions, 5 appearances for him. Then we get into the wingers, the forward line. Williamson, 7 appearances, 7 starts, I should say, and substitute appearance. Now starting to see them, so 8 appearances in all competitions, 5 appearances in the league. John Aston, 28 appearances in all competitions, 4 goals, 23 and 4 in the league. George Best with 17 goals in 43, 9 in 31 in the league. Bobby Charlton, as we earlier mentioned, 18 goals in 54 in all competitions, so consistent in terms of output and being there on the pitch as well. 16 in 38 in the league. John Connelly, he's missed a few games as well. He misses 10 in the league, 31 appearances and a substitute appearance, and 5 goals in the league, 13 in all competitions for him. Dennis Lowe, as always, reliable with the goals, 24 goals in 49 games, 15 in 33 in the league. Top goal scorer, though, this season is David Hurd with 33 in 51 and a substitute appearance as well, 24 in 37 games in the league. David Sadler makes 10 league appearances and scores 4 goals. And that leads us on to the final debutant who you mentioned earlier on, Paddy, is Jimmy Ryan. He, the other side of the scale to George really, very shy, very young. And he was George's best friend for a little while, but they were very opposite in terms of character. In fact, no, let's say very opposite. For a while, they were very similar in terms of character, right? They're inside forwards. Jim a little bit more workman-like than George. He didn't have the braggadocious style on the pitch, but off the pitch, they were the 2 lads who would have been at the back of the pack, wouldn't they?
That's very much so. They both like looking at pretty girls, but they part of the reason they were pals was that neither of them had much of a taste for the booze. Jimmy recalled that George would make 1 bottle of beer last the whole night, and he probably wouldn't have finished it at the end of the evenings when they went out. So it was, they were pals. They were both relatively shy. I mean, I mentioned George as a showman, but that was on the field. Off the field, he was quite selfie-facing, particularly in his younger years. But Jim, back in the had come through to the side, had scored in that game that I mentioned against Villa, but very different in terms of physicality from John Fitzpatrick, who we mentioned before, who came on as sub for Dennis. And, with Fitzpatrick, his fellow Aberdonian Law, Fulks, Styles, who was the other one you mentioned earlier? It's Crerand. I mean, and we haven't even mentioned Bobby Noble. I mean, Manchester United were very much equipped by now for the physicality that was about to, really, it grew during the 60s. And I suppose was to be exemplified by a Roughhouse Cup final, which ended at Old Trafford with a very good game between Chelsea and Leeds, which was basically an assassination match with a bit of football mixed in. So United were very much equipped for that side of things if the football didn't work as it did in Lisbon.
The team tactics, I mean, it's the same lineup from the last episode, but obviously Greg would have been in goal. Dunn is in there because he would have been first choice if he had been able to stay fit, but Greg was in there, and really this was already necessitating Busby thinking, and I think I need to make another change in my goalkeeping area. And the rest of the side is sort of looking really solid at the moment. There's a lot of players coming to the peak as well.
I mean, it's worth saying, Wayne, sorry to interrupt, but that we talk about Lobes Charlton and they're now part of Manchester United. In fact, they're one of the most glamorous aspects of Manchester United's history. But when you gave us the statistics of David Hurd there, you realize Hurd would have been a standout in any other team. But because of those three, and you've just reeled off his goal scoring record in the 65-6 season, that would have made him a star at pretty well any other club.
Yeah, I mean, that follows on from 28 the previous season and 27 the season before that. And there was this feeling at the time that he wasn't ever as popular with the Old Trafford crowd as those other players. But again, like I said, the figures speak for themselves, don't they? It's really,
yes, they do.
Really,
absolutely do. But he is an undersung part of this section of Manchester United history. But I'm glad we've had the chance to dwell on David Hurd a little bit. Certainly very, very good value for whatever it was, 40,000 or whatever they paid, no less, to bring him from Arsenal.
Yeah. The colours this season United wore were red, white, and the red socks still, I believe, still in red socks, all white second strip, and the blue shirt and white shorts and socks was the third kit. The United review match program still remained the same with the handshake on the front at the top.
With a bizarre handshake,
Yeah, well, we'll keep mentioning that until it gets changed. Average attendance this season dropped again, in spite of the new stand, 41,352 at the ground. And the key result for United this season, without doubt, was the win over Benfica, because it gave this idea of a very rosy future and sort of put everything else into shade. And when you look at a season when you don't win anything and it's still remembered for a result and a performance like that, tells you everything that you need to know about how important it was. Elsewhere in football, Liverpool won the league. I don't like saying that very much, but fortunately, going to have to get
the key result. You're talking about United's key result. The key result for Liverpool was beating United at Anfield. Where they came from behind to win 2-1, and that gave Liverpool the impetus to run away and claim the title. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, New Year's Day, that one. Low scored, and Liverpool came back and steamrolled their way to title. Their neighbours Everton went on to win the FA Cup after knocking United out, and West Brom, who we need to give a mention to because they scored 91 league goals this season, top scorers in the division, and they got just reward for their efforts by winning the League Cup.
Brief mention, if I may. Sorry, on that cup final, it was one of the classics. Sheffield Wednesday were 2-0 up. Everton came from behind to beat them 3-2 in one of the classic cup finals. Yeah, and you were going to say something about Liverpool.
And they got to the Winners' Cup final, and they were knocked out by not knocked out, beaten in the final in Hampden Park.
Hampden Park, by Borussia Dortmund. Yeah, and that was also elsewhere in football, and we are ignoring an elephant in the room here, but. We ought to say that Matt Busby's neighbour was now Joe Mercer, new manager of Manchester City, who made the inspired decision to appoint as his coach one Malcolm Allison. And under Mercer and Allison, Man City were promoted. So we can look forward in the next episode to Manchester derbies again.
The first attempt at broadcasting a live game from one ground to another happened earlier this season. So Coventry had a game at Cardiff, and it was broadcast back to Highfield Road, and I think 10,000 fans were in attendance there. Real Madrid won the European Cup. After winning the first 5, they'd had a little bit of a hiatus, with the Inter Milan and Benfica mini dominance, you would say, and they came from behind to beat Partizan Belgrade in the final there, and it'd be a long time before Real Madrid won it again. By the way, it'd be a long time.
A long time, yeah. But that's this elephant in the room that I talked about before, Wayne, is neither Dennis Law nor I remember it with any great fondness, because it was, of course, 1966, as everybody knows, the year in which England won that World Cup on home ground, and this came in a summer, and the reason I mentioned Dennis Law is that at the end of the season, Dennis went back to stay with his family in Aberdeen, but he left a letter with the club at the club for Matt Busby. He didn't want to deliver the letter personally because inside it was a transfer or a demand. It wasn't a transfer request, it was a demand for more money. To which Matt, a furious Matt Busby, responded by putting him on the transfer list. Dennis Law. And anyway, this, even Dennis was a bit scared by this. And so between them, Busby and Law cooked up a little deal whereby Dennis got the pay rise as long as he promised not to. He also wanted a lump sum, but he wasn't given that. He was given his pay rise, but told, just don't go bragging about it in the dressing room. I don't want the other players to know. He said, fine, no problem, Bob. And in return, he wrote a letter apologizing to Matt Busby for asking for a transfer so that Matt was able to keep his power over the dressing room, and Dennis got his dosh. However, it wasn't entirely a happy summer for Dennis because England, as I say, won this World Cup with Bobby Charlton very, very much prominence. I know West Ham, because they had Moore, Peters and Hurst, were able to claim that they were fundamental to winning the World Cup for England, but undoubtedly Charlton stamped himself in that summer at Wembley Stadium as one of the best players in the world. And in fact, from that tournament onwards, the words Bobby Charlton were part of an international language of football. Wherever you went, people would say, "Oh, Bobby Charlton," So it was great, but as I say, not for yes for Bobby Charlton, yes for Nobby Stiles, but not for Dennis, who, well, on the day England won the World Cup, was famously playing golf to try and get away from it.
There's no truth to the rumours that Paddy or Dennis were behind the theft of the Jules Rimet trophy.
No, both of us would deny that, but we know who found the trophy. Who was that? I can't remember you tell me.
Pickles the dog.
Pickles, yes. Pickles the dog. It was stolen before the tournament, I think, and found on a piece of, was it wasteland or something? Yeah. Right, Pickles the dog, who became a national hero for finding the FA Cup.
Yeah, but unfortunately he didn't get a medal, and wouldn't be awarded with the Ballon d'Or as Bobby Charlton eventually would for his efforts this year. But Pickles is also no less part of the national folklore than Bobby Charlton for his efforts that year. Yeah, quickly, well dealt with, Paddy. I know it's a painful subject, but we can now move on from England. Don't dwell on it as much as we do the Dundee League title win, because we're not that bothered about it on this episode. That's it. We'll be back next time to see if United can re-challenge for the league after a difficult season. If you're watching the video, please give it a like and subscribe. Join in the conversation in the comment section. If you're listening back on the audio podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a review on the platform you're listening on. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.